Thank you for joining me on a quilting tale today. My name is Shaylin, and I am so excited to launch a new project in this video. It's one that I'll be working on throughout the year. It's going to take some time, but the reason I'm excited about it is because I get to make it with my mom. My mom is a crocheter and has been since, I think, high school, and it's not something that I've ever picked up on or learned how to do, but I've always liked the things that she's made. And when I saw this free pattern by Fanny Lu Designs that involved quilting and crocheting, I thought this would be just the perfect hybrid to do a project with her. So it's called High Tea Crochet Fusion Quilt, and it involves making several squares that have a crocheted trim around each, and then they get whip stitched together and then crocheted all around the border. And so I think it's just going to be beautiful. Having seen some pictures of it online, I thought this is one we could definitely make. I showed the pattern to my mom and said, "Do you think you could do this crochet pattern?" I have no idea. When I look at it, it looks kind of like gibberish to me. And so she looked at it, and there's video tutorials on it, and she said, "Yes, I can do that." And so we have started the process. So that's what this video is. I'm going to show you the first couple steps of the process for making this quilt. One is going to be making the squares and then blanket stitching around them. And that's what's going to allow my mom to crochet the trim around each square. And I realized very quickly that this is going to be a long process. The blanket stitching takes a while. I'm not used to working with a thicker yarn, and so I'm still getting a feel for keeping it from bunching and fraying as I'm pulling it through the fabric. But it's coming along, and so in a future video, once I get some of those crocheted squares back, I will do the next steps, which include blocking them so that I can make them lay flat, and then whip stitching them together into the actual quilt top. And then she will do the final step of crocheting the border all around it. And so I've picked out some lovely fabric and tried my best at choosing the right kind of yarn. That's another world I'm not as familiar with, but I think I picked out a good one. And I just thought I would share the progress so far. And in future videos, I'll update where I am in this process. It's going to be a while, but I just thought it would be fun to share how it's coming along throughout this year. So let's get right into it. I'll show you the fabric that I chose for this quilt. I'm so excited to use this line. I bought it at first not knowing what quilt I'd be making with it, but this is Art Gallery Fabrics Bloom Core in the blush colorway. It comes with 10 fat quarters, and I believe there was also kind of a teal greenish colorway, and then another with oranges and yellows. They were also pretty, but I'm just drawn to the pinks. And so I got that fat quarter bundle, and I bought 5 yards of the backing, which goes with this line. And I'm happy I did that because I want to enlarge this quilt. I know I won't need all 5 yards for the backing squares, but with just having 10 fat quarters, I am going to need a little more, so I'll just have more of this print, which is great because it's my favorite print in the collection. And so I'm thinking, instead of the baby quilt size that the pattern has, enlarging it to a throw size, 120 squares with 10 across and 12 rows down. That means I'm going to need 120 top squares that are 6 inches, 120 backing squares from this fabric, and I'll also have to get some of my top squares from it. And I'll also need 120 batting squares, which is going to be a great way to use up my scraps. So all the squares I'm going to cut will be 6 inches. I chose for the yarn Bernat Softy Baby in white. No special name, it just says white. I don't know much about yarn, but this is so soft, and the pattern designer had mentioned using the Bernat baby, so I thought I'd just stay close to what she used because I liked the look of it in the pictures. I don't know how many skeins of yarn I'm gonna need for the throw size. I have 3 to start with. I know that won't be enough, but I figured my mom can let me know when she's running low and I can get more and get a better estimate of what I'll need at that time. Since this won't involve a lot of piecing, I'm not going to best press my fabric like I usually would. I'm just going to iron it, get the wrinkles out, use steam, and then I will cut my 6-inch squares. So let's go ahead and do that now. Cut my yardage, I'm gonna cut it into 6-inch strips, but a little more than 6 inches because I haven't ironed it yet and I expect some shrinkage. So this ruler is a 6-inch across ruler, so I'm just going to have a little bit overhanging and a little more generous on this side because this is the first cut and I know it's not always folded precisely on the line. It sticks out a little more on top here. So it's folded in half, selvage to selvage up top there. So I'm going to just cut some slightly larger than 6-inch strips. I'll line one of my ruler lines along the fold of the fabric. And now I can do a little less overhang because I have a nice clean cut. So I'm doing just about a little more than a 1/4 inch overage to account for shrinkage. And that will make ironing these pieces a lot easier than trying to iron this whole big piece. I have cut 22 about 6 1/4 inch strips to give me at least 150 6-inch squares. So if it helps, each 42-inch strip, there's 42 inches of usable fabric, will give me 7 6-inch squares. So I need 120 squares for the back and 30 more for the top because I don't have enough fat quarters, and I'm thinking I can get 9 6-inch squares out of each fat quarter. So that's where I'm getting these numbers from. But if you're making a different size standard fabric, you'll probably get 7 6-inch squares out of a strip. So I'm going to go ahead and start ironing these now, and we can get them cut up. To get 9 squares out of my fat quarter, 9 6-inch squares, I need to be very careful with the trimming. They are not even at this point. They need to be straightened up, and because fat quarters are 18 inches wide to begin with, usually there's a little extra. I need to be very careful trimming so I can keep it as close to 18 as possible. So I'm going to just line up the edges as best I can. And I'll put my stripology ruler along the fold here, and I just want to make sure that I have a little bit hanging out past the 0 and a little hanging out past 18, and there is just a sliver on each side. So I'm going to cut off at the 0 mark, 6, 12, and 18. So that takes off just the tiniest strings, and then I'm going to layer my 3 strips, and this edge is not straight either, so I'll want to layer to make sure that I can get a clean cut. So I'll put the selvage ends on one side. Let's make sure that the sides are all lined up. Okay. So since this needs a clean edge, I'm gonna have a little bit to the left of my 0 line, line up the bottom to make sure it's all straight. I'm going to cut on the 0 line, and then 6, 12, 18. Just a little bit of scraps there. I have 3, 6, and my 9 6-inch squares, and a little bit of extra that I'll add to my scraps. So it's pretty quick to do this with my fat quarters using the stripology ruler. I'm going to finish the rest of them now. I'm ready to start assembling the blocks with my top fabrics, my backing fabrics, and a stack of batting. I'll also be using a little dish to catch my threads, and I have this magnet here to get a consistent 1/2-inch seam, because that's the initial sewing that we'll do, is a 1/2-inch seam allowance around. And finally, I will use a little chopstick here as a point turner just to get the corners of my squares poked out. Fanny Lu Designs has a very in-depth tutorial on their blog post showing each step of this process, including detailed YouTube videos for each step. So rather than go in depth myself, I'm just going to give you a little glimpse of the process.
I've got my 120 squares ready to press and then sew a 1/4 inch seam around. So I'm going to make sure I press this open portion really flat as I press the rest of the block. So I just want to make sure that the pieces are folded nicely under that 1/4 inch seam that I haven't sewn yet.
After the squares are finished, it's time for the second step, which is to blanket stitch. And the pattern recommends making a little paper template with 1/4 inch marks for your 16 stitches that you'll do across each side, and then you'll also do 3 on each corner. So you start with a length of yarn about 3 arms length, maybe a little extra I found, just depending on how much of a tail you want to leave. And then I'm using a thimble and a large needle, and I want to start from behind the block, just making sure my needle comes under the stitches and over that first tick mark. And so you pull it through, and it can be a little tough, that's why I'm using the thimble, but you're going to pull it through and leave a little tail. Now my mom told me after doing a few of these, the crocheting around them, that somewhere between 1 and 2 inches seems fine for a tail. I was making them a little longer than she needed. But you'll wrap it around and come back through the top, kind of in the seam of the top there. You're going to come through, and that will be the only stitching you'll do from behind the block. The rest you're going to start from the front of the block, going down the rest of the paper. So it starts out kind of long, and you just have to be careful trying not to fray it or tangle the yarn, and just making sure that the stitches look nice and straight going up and down. And then I'm going to take the needle and go right above that second tick mark through the back, wrap the yarn behind the needle, and then pull the rest of the yarn through. So I'm just repeating this process all the way across until I have done 16 stitches, and it gets easier as the yarn gets shorter, but you'll see as I'm going here that I do get some bunching and a little bit of tangling, and so I will share some tips toward the end of how I got it to go a little smoother and not have as much tangling. But every time you put that needle back in, you're going to go underneath the stitch line, and so I think this is about where I'm going to get a pretty big tangle, and I thought you don't need to watch me fuss through it and try to get it out, but you might have to remove your thimble. I'm using a silicone thimble here, and sometimes I think that made the yarn bunch a little more. So I worked it out. Every time it bunched, it was fine. I was able to get the tangle out, but it does make this a longer process. So like I said, listen till the end. I'll share some tips for what made it start going faster and tangle less. When you're ready to do the corner, you've done your 16 stitches across one side, you're going to go through the center of the corner. So I believe this is my 16th stitch, have a little bit of bunching there, but now I'm going to take my needle and stick it right in the corner underneath the thread line. And you don't need the little template for this part, but you're going to wrap it the same way. You're going to pull it straight so it lines up with your last row of stitches, and then you're going to go through that same hole, wrap under the needle again, and this time when you pull it, you want it to be going kind of at a 45-degree angle across the corner, and so you can just move it over a little bit with your needle if need be. Then you go through it one more time, that same hole, and you start another vertical stitch that's going to kick off the next row. And so you put your paper back, just pin it in there, and start your 16 stitches again. When it's time to tie off, you can go under your first loop and under your last loop, just being careful not to go through the yarn, and that will make a closing little line above your block that goes with the others. And you can just go under that and just make a knot. I don't know if this is exactly how it was demonstrated, but it's just to close it off and make sure that there's something to catch when my mom's doing the crocheted trim. These are taking me a bit longer than anticipated, so I think instead of waiting to get all 120 done, I'm just going to make small batches and drop them off to my mom as I can, and just pick up the ones she's able to crochet the trim around, and I'll drop off more to her. And so slow and steady is going to win the race on this one, but I'm going to do a few more and then get these to her and work on some other projects in between. But I am thinking that this is going to be worth the time and effort. I think the result is going to be just gorgeous. So I'm going to just make a few more, get them to her, and hopefully I will have some to share soon that are all trimmed up. I will say, after making even more of those squares, blanket stitching around them, that it did seem to get easier, a few less tangles and bunching. When I made one end of the yarn shorter, considerably shorter, so it would pull through quickly, and then the rest seemed to just come naturally. And also just trying to pull it straight out instead of, behind me, but just pulling it straight so I could watch and see if there's any bunching happening where it's going through the fabric. So that has helped. I did set a timer to see how long it's taking me, and right now I'm at about 25 minutes to blanket stitch one square, and I'm making 120 of them. So like I said in the intro, this is going to take some time, but I think it will be well worth it, and I'm hoping I'll get even faster with it. So watch for future updates in my videos. I'll just share the progress of how these blocks are coming, and then I'll make videos showing the blocking process and the whip stitching process once they're all done. Make sure you like and subscribe if you want to see more videos on how this quilt is coming along. If you subscribe, the video will pop up in your feed and you will hopefully not miss it. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you're looking forward to seeing how this quilt comes along. Take care.